Two teams I really want to pay attention to for the rest of the season is the New York Knicks and the San Antonio Spurs. Now, they already ended up playing each other early in the season with the full NBA Cup game. There were a lot of players, a lot of role players for New York who had really big games. Tyler Kolek, Mitchell Robinson, and then also OG Anunoby all had really, really great games. They ended up beating out San Antonio in that Cup final. But I feel like this is two teams who are going to be good for the rest of the season. Now, both these two teams are in really, really different positions because even though they're both the relative two seeds in their conferences, they have really different expectations. Um, I feel like going to the end of the season and especially early into the season. Because a team like San Antonio, a lot of people knew they were going to be decently competitive. Because I think even I had them um, at like around the 6 to 8 seed type of position last season. They were a 10 seed, but Wemby was dealing with injuries. Darren Fox didn't end up getting traded to them till late into um, into the season because of that Sacramento trade at the deadline. But they've blown all of their expectations out the water, and they're the 2 seed in a really competitive West, and they performed really well against some of the better teams too. It's not like they're just picking up wins against some of the mid or trash teams in in the conference and in the East. So they've done a really good job of competing with LA and then having a dominant stretch against OKC, who are the championship favorites, and I think are still the championship favorites. But matchup wise, San Antonio matches up with them really well. And on the other side of things, you got New York, who New York going into the season, they had championship aspirations. They last season I think made a little bit farther than people expected. I think a lot of people had them losing to Boston in that semifinal matchup. They end up getting over Boston, end up losing to Indiana, but they have real championship expectations, and I think part of it is the whole Indiana and Boston things where we knew that Indiana wasn't going to be as good with Tyrese Halliburton. Now, we didn't know they were going to be this bad because they're not even in the conversation at all. But yeah, Indiana not being in the conversation for at least this year, and then Boston, even though Boston is really outperforming where they should be at, they you know they still feel like they're gonna kind of be a little heavy-handed when it comes to the playoffs because Jason Tatum isn't gonna be, you know, probably Jason like the real Jason Tatum that we expect. Like he's not gonna be a 28, 29 point per game scorer probably just coming off of that Achilles injury. If he is, then hey watch out because that's gonna be a really tough squad to beat. But I feel like with those two teams not really being in the picture as much as you'd expect. And then Cleveland not even doing what Cleveland was expected to do. Like Cleveland was the 1 seed last season, and now they're not really in the picture. So Cleveland not performing as well as they would. And then the only other big competition being Detroit, who I'm a big fan of Detroit, but I feel like they're in that type of situation too where they just haven't had the experience to really make a finals run. Because that's one thing to match up with a team in the first round and compete really well with them. I really liked how Detroit competed with New York, a series that I think could have gone to 7 if it wasn't for kind of a shaky playoff call and foul call at the end of it. Um, but I just think that Detroit, they need one more year of playing multiple rounds in the playoffs to kind of just get that type of experience. Because that's a big thing. Like I think winning your first series is huge if you're a really good team. Getting that kind of monkey off your back, and then being able to like go to the conference finals, go to the championship. So New York, knowing all that, I think this season they have really big expectations, and I think this is really their year. Like if New York isn't able to make it to, um, if they're not able to make it to the conference finals at minimum, it's just a disappointment. Like there's no really other way to word it around because there should be no team unless Boston has some crazy thing that happened. So maybe New York wants to position themselves as the 1 seed so they don't have to match up with Boston, who might end up being the 3 seed. But I just think it'd be extremely disappointing season if they weren't able to make it as as a conference finals, at least appearance. Like my thing is, I think their expectation should be make the finals. Like this is their year, and I say it too that this is their year because next year, next year you're gonna have to worry about a lot more teams. Like imagine Cleveland, figuring stuff out, and Cleveland being as competitive as they were last season. You got to deal with Indiana getting Tyrese Halliburton, and I promise you that Indiana team will be able to turn around that quick because they're also going to get a good draft pick. Like this Indiana team next year is going to have Tyrese back, and they might even get like a top 5 pick coming in. So they'll have another person on the roster who could be really, really good for them early on. You got a Boston team with a 4-year Jason Tatum. Um, you have some of the other teams in the East improving a little bit, and then you also have a team like Detroit, if they're the 1 seed now, next season I can't expect them to be worse because they've gone from being trash to being a 6 seed to being the 1 seed. Next year they could be a 1 seed and be even more competitive than they are this season as they kind of figure out some of their offensive issues that they've had. So New York, this has got to be their year. This has got to be their year, and I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily have them winning against some of those top West teams like Houston, like OKC, like San Antonio, like Denver. But history's kind of shown us too. Like once you're in the playoffs or once you're in the finals, it doesn't really matter because there are all of these David versus Goliath kind of narratives. But I think last season kind of puts to bed some of that. Like you know, going into it, it was definitely a David versus Goliath type of situation. But as the series went on, as Indiana was even more competitive than you expected, it just kind of evened out to where at the end of it, it was just 2 super competitive teams. And I think if New York is able to get to the finals specifically, I think if they can get to the finals, they can compete with any of those teams. Not because they have the talent necessarily as some of those better teams, but because there's a certain level that teams and players usually step up in when they realize, okay, it's just one more step to winning that championship. And I think, you know, games being at Madison Square Garden for the finals will be huge for New York. And I just don't think New York is the type of team that gets smaller when the spotlight is bigger. I think they've shown, winning the NBA Cup, making the conference finals last season, that they're kind of ready to be really, really in that spotlight. And early this season too, like they're the 2 seed. They've gone on a really good stretch. They've won tons of games. So they look like a competitive team. I think I just have more questions for them individually than I do as a team as a whole, because going into the playoffs too, you need confidence as a team, but you also need confidence that your individual guys are going to be able to perform and step up. And I think I got pretty good confidence in their role players. Like, I like how Tyler Kolek has stepped up. I like some of the offense that Jordan Clarkson can provide. He had a really good offensive game against San Antonio. What was that, like a week ago now, like during the NBA Cup? I like Mitchell Robinson as a backup big. OG, he's probably the X factor for that team. Their best defender, a good offensive player, and he's just a really good player overall, I think, for any type of squad. And then I also like Josh Hart, because Josh Hart's a great defender. He can rebound, and sometimes he can hit a 3. So I think they're role players. They don't really have to worry too much about that. It feels like they're really, really deep as a whole roster. I think I just got more questions about them. Also, Mikel's been really good for them too. I got way more questions about them up top. Like, a big part of a championship squad is, of course, all of the people who end up making it collective. But it's also important for your stars to be able to perform during the brightest lights. And I think, I have a lot of trust and faith in Jalen Brunson being able to perform well in high-stakes situations, because he always seems to perform well in these type of situations. He's been a dominant scorer in, I feel like, every playoff series he's been in with New York, and he is that go-to guy in the clutch. So I don't really got too many questions about him. It's more towards Cat. And there's no disrespect to Cat, but Cat is really, I think, a swing player for this type of squad, because he has all the tools to be really, really, really impactful for this team and be that second player on a championship squad, because he's a great scorer. He's a great passer. He's great at rebounding, and you don't really have to worry about him when it comes to shooting because he's been a good shooter since he's gotten in the league. So you're not gonna have people like trying to force him to the 3-point line or something and have his offense taken away. He's also a good point. He's a good paint scorer too, so that's not an issue. My issue with him is more the mistakes, the foul trouble, and sometimes the inconsistency that can come from Cat. Because he can be really, really important for your team, but then he can also kind of just bring your team down a little bit. So I'm just wondering how is a player like him going to perform um, in the playoffs? Because we saw it with Minnesota a little bit where he did have some really good games in those playoff series, but he also did have some games where it's like you kind of sold this him a little bit. So I'm just hoping that Cat being in a different system where I feel like he has less responsibility because I think it's more well-rounded than that Minnesota team that he ended up going deep into the playoffs to, that it'd be a little bit of a better situation for him. Um, so I think that's going to be super important for this New York team is how is Karl Anthony Towns going to perform um, as that number two guy, because if I think what's going to happen is going to happen with Jalen Brunson being consistent and those role guys doing what they need to do, I think Cat is really going to be the difference between not only making it to the finals, but being able to compete against whoever's coming out the West. If it's OKC, if it's Denver, if it's San Antonio, if it's Houston, even if it's a different team like maybe LA or Minnesota, like you never know. So I think it's going to be really important for him to be, he needs to be on his A game, and I don't think he can have too much drop off game to game because he is going to be a guy who's going to need to play 35, 40 minutes a night. So he's someone I'm going to look out for. And on the opposite side of things, I think there's a real path for San Antonio to be competitive enough to make a finals and maybe even win a finals this season. Again, I kind of have them a year out just because I think they're missing some of the experience for some of these guys, and I think there are some sneaky kind of offensive issues too that this team has. Again, this team's way ahead of schedule, so it's not really a knock on them. Like being like having championship aspirations and basically your third year of a rebuild is a really good position to be in. But yeah, I think there's a path for them to be a championship team. I think Wemby, I don't see Wemby as like a 25 point per game scorer, a huge scorer in the playoffs, but I think he's going to be a huge impact because he's going to be the best defender in the world. So that's already giving you a huge impact on one side. And then he's also going to be a huge impact offensively too, because even though I don't see him scoring 25 points per game or dropping too many like 30 or 40 like a true number one would, he has gravity. And people talk about gravity when you're talking about Luka, when you're talking about Jokic, when you're talking about Curry, but Wemby also has that. Not as a passer in the same way that those dudes do, in the same way that Curry does as a three-point shooter, but his ability to make it so uncomfortable to have matchups against him naturally draw in more people and make it more difficult to guard everyone. Because the thing about Wemby too is even though he's not really the best at any individual thing yet, he's so good at all of the things that it's so hard to match up with him because he's also 7'4". Like if you're 7'4" and you're a good three-point shooter, you're good in the mid-range, you're good in the post, you're a good lob threat, and you cover up so much space on the offensive side, it just forces people to be drawn towards you. So he's somebody that I don't really have too many questions about in the playoffs. Like I got a lot of confidence in his ability and in his impactfulness. Fox is another person too who Fox doesn't really have that much playoff experience and not like competitive playoff experience. Maybe he played in a play-in game or a playoff series with Sacramento, like 2 years ago or a few years ago. I can't really remember, but I just see Fox as somebody who's had enough experience in the NBA and is really good at elevating his performance in pressure situations that I think he's going to be really good for them in the playoffs. My question is the other guys. I think for this team to have a real path to making it to the finals and winning the finals with how competitive it is, some players are going to need to play a little above their expectations and even above where they're at now, because I think they're playing really well for what people would expect it to. And I think Stephen Castle, he's going to be someone I would definitely watch because he's been really good right now, but he is kind of like that mold of a player who typically struggles in their first type of playoffs because it's gonna be his first playoffs, so he doesn't have the experience of playoff pressure, um, and he he can tend to turn things over and have a few bad games here and there because he can be a little reckless with the ball. And in the playoffs, there's a lot more pressure. It's a lot harder to control your offense the way you want to because the defense is better. So he's somebody I definitely watch. Dylan Harper, who's been super important for them this season. I don't know how well a rookie is gonna play in that type of situation. And then some of those other role guys like Vassell, like Harrison Barnes, like Champagny, who are really important for them right now. I don't know how they're gonna perform. Like someone like Harrison Barnes, he'd be really important for this team if they're gonna make a playoff run. But he's been pretty inconsistent in a lot of his playoff performances. But regardless, both of these two teams, and then really good shot by Jalen Brunson to close out this game to lose by two. I mean, it was a good shot, ended up losing, but great win by the Spurs. But yeah, both these teams are going to be super, super competitive.